And live from the Scheinfeld Center Innovator Studio at Santa Barbara City College, it's the Enlightened Entrepreneur Podcast, where we inform and inspire Gen Z to become even more entrepreneurial and innovative in our global economy. I'm your host, Julie Sampson, Director of the Scheinfeld Center, and thank you so much for joining us here to create livelihoods that matter, be your own boss, and make the world an even better place. Well, you know, the excitement of starting a new business, there's so much to focus on, and it's easy to lose track of the details. So here to help us identify the top 5 legal mistakes startups make and how you can avoid them with your own venture is Daniel Spitz. Daniel is an attorney with a solo legal practice focusing on corporate law, entertainment law, and estate planning. And as counsel, Daniel has assisted many small businesses through their startup and growth phases, including designing customized operational partnership and equity-based shareholder agreements. In addition, Daniel is also a full-time professor at Santa Barbara City College in the Department of Business Administration, as well as an adjunct instructor at California State University in Los Angeles. Daniel, thank you so much. Welcome to the podcast, and thank you for taking the time.
Thanks so much for having me, Julie.
Yeah, it's great to have you here. Well, I'm sure with all of your experience that you've seen things that work really well as far as startups and the law and things that don't work well. So I'm really looking forward to you helping us to see around the corners and avoid the potholes, so to speak. So where would you like to start us off?
Yeah, thanks so much for that. So good afternoon, everyone, to those of you who are joining live, and hello to all my friends and family back in Canada as well. There are 5 topics that I want to discuss today regarding why startups fail. Some of these are primarily business issues. Some involve legal issues with the outset at formation, as well as ongoing legal compliance matters. And so I'll sort of weave through each of these 5 collectively. So let's start off with the first issue. This is what I like to call know who you are and know who you're not. When a business gets started, it's really important to know the range of services that a company is offering. I like to talk about this in the context of establishing core competencies. This really looks at the service or good that your company is known for. And so when I was starting out my own legal practice, I focused on these 3 areas of estate planning, corporate law, and entertainment, things that I felt that I had a comparative advantage on relative to other new companies and new law firms in the market. And so the danger is if a company doesn't have enough of these core competencies, enough of these services at the outset, it's going to have to rely on a larger number of clients who need that specific task. Conversely, if you have too many services, the company can lose focus on what makes it the most money, or the company ends up taking on business that takes them more time to get up to speed on how to handle and deliver results for its clients. And so businesses should be really taking a strategic approach towards its formation and identify 3 market needs or areas of expertise, and then sort of organically grow out the business from there.
So what kind of legal things arise out of this particular dynamic?
Sure, absolutely. It's when companies take on business that they are not as proficient in, there's always a danger, at least in the legal world, of committing malpractice by not being up to speed in these core issues. For general service-based businesses, this can lead to a lot of breaches of contract. And so we see a lot of disputes arise in the legal field between clients that take on business that they're just simply not proficient in. And that has a trickle-down effect on the remaining parts of their profits, as well as spending time in court as opposed to running their business.
Yeah, I think that this is really relevant, you know, with students who are just forming their ventures. You know, there's a thing about having a big vision, but starting super simply, you know, and this is a really good reason, you know, to really back up that approach. You know, sometimes they feel like if they're not going after their vision, you know, in a bigger way, that they're actually going to be losing clients, but it could be that actually by not minimizing that they're just going to be causing trouble for themselves down the road. So that's a really good point.
So the second issue that I've identified as another reason why startups fail is this idea of startup capital and ongoing costs. So where's the cash, essentially? Underfunding a company at the outset is a very common mistake that I see with clients. Early on, your business has formation costs in the form of filing fees with the Secretary of State. You have to pay franchise fees and taxes at the state level. And then you have to start acquiring inventory or supplies. You need to rent office space, or you're working from home and adapting a home office, as well as procuring business insurance. And so most businesses do account for these initial first 3 to 6 months. They take out loans. However, for a startup, what they fail to recognize is that there's no recurring revenue on day one that a business can rely on. And so as a result, we get past these first 3 to 6 months in initial capital, and then these cash sources start to dwindle. At this time, the business isn't typically profitable. And so it's really difficult for businesses to grow the company when they have to manage ongoing costs. Insurance costs come up, hidden costs come up, and companies that are underfunded at the outset aren't prepared for these challenges.
And so is a lot of what you see businesses not being able to follow through on contracts? What kinds of things do you see from that?
Sure. Ultimately, businesses get distracted from what they do best by having to deal with vendors to delay payment. They're waiting on recurring revenue to come in so they can actually meet their existing expense obligations. And that becomes a challenge, especially when one partner wants to grow the company and put in additional money, and perhaps another partner feels differently or can't make the same commitment. And so the best way to structure that is really to have a comprehensive partnership agreement in place that sets forth the rights and duties of each individual. And this helps resolve disputes before they occur.
We often set that up, sometimes in classes, students will start ventures. Sometimes they'll partner up on starting a venture, and they don't really know each other all that well, oftentimes at the very beginning. So, in that particular circumstance, we've done partnership agreements just for within the class, so that they have an agreement about, like, if they're going to win funds, during competitions and stuff, how that will be distributed amongst the people on the team, how they're, they keep a inventor's notebook about who came up with what and how that happened, how things evolve, like that. But so at that early stage, this is even important to be managing this early on. I think kind of thinking about the what ifs, what could happen down the road, because it can be, when things are going well, it's so easy to get along. And then when the challenges happen, I think that people can be unprepared. Yeah,
certainly. And so a comprehensive partnership agreement really sets forth 3 main tenets. What happens when income starts coming into the company? How do we manage risk amongst the various partners in the business? And how do we deal with voting rights? Are these equal? And what happens if we want to bring another partner in the future? What's the mechanism for establishing that?
All right. So what's the next one?
Yeah, let's move on to point number 3. So I call this, and it leads into what we were just talking about, I call this the other half, or the hustle gene. Many times we get into business with the wrong people as partners. We have co-investors who have different work ethics or different strategies to run the business. That happens a lot. Most partnerships that come into my office begin as friends, family, or even as previous clients of one another. I had a client that came into my office about 2 years ago. 2 partners who had worked together in separate businesses were finally coming together as joint venturers, and they were in it for the long haul. Well, 1 year down the road, one partner wanted out. At the first sign of trouble, they were out the door and nowhere to be seen. And so despite having this sort of pre-existing relationship of trust with one another, many disputes arise when there's this inequitable distribution of work, or if one partner is putting up the majority of the money and not seeing results as quickly as expected. And so with respect to the hustle gene, in these small new startups, you're only making money when you handle business. It's an eat what you kill mentality. And that's vastly different for some people who have worked in corporations before, where clients actively seek you out and know about your business. And so knowing how to promote yourself the right way is really important to establishing good recurring clients and the revenue that comes with it.
Have you seen anything from clients who really work well together versus those that don't work well together? You know, are there any particular dynamics that you see that work, that people can use to work in their favor?
Yeah, I would certainly say that most of the time that startups come to a lawyer, it's because something has been wrong, essentially. Something has not gone according to plan. But what makes great partnerships successful is having diverging strengths. I like to say we separate it into two categories. We have the finders and the grinders, people who are going out, securing clients, bringing in business. And then we have the people who are doing the work, the mavens of information, the people that know the ins and outs of that specific industry. So having both with these diverging skill sets is so vital to long-term success.
Yeah, really important. And so the thing is, what we see sometimes with aspiring entrepreneurs is they're still learning what they're good at and what they're not good at, right? Sometimes the entrepreneur will have an idea of something that they'd like to bring into fruition, and they're not even considering partners at that point, right? So we see that dynamic too, you know, not really knowing one's own strengths and where one's gaps are, and also, you know, just kind of taking everything on and thinking that they're just going to do everything, which they're both problematic scenarios. I think that one of the great things that we offer at the Scheinfeld Center is our RISE, our Readiness Inventory for Successful Entrepreneurship inventory that helps entrepreneurs understand of skills that are correlated with entrepreneurial success, you know, where their strengths are and where they don't have strengths, you know. And I think it's the type of thing too, where much like the businesses need to identify what their core competencies are, I think the entrepreneurs also need to do that, because there's even very seasoned entrepreneurs may have areas that they just aren't good at. You know, maybe they might know about it, but they're just not good at it, right? And so I think being able to take that honest look and having some way to get that feedback, I think it's really important early on.
I agree. It's certainly a learning process for new organizations, especially with those who are on the younger side. I think there's a tendency for younger workers not to utilize the resources at their disposal, using things like the Scheinfeld Center, going to the professors, meeting with other industry experts, and getting some insight in terms of how they run their business day to day, and what specializations are available to them as a result.
Right. Yeah. And I think this is something, you know, in the way education is changing, you know, there's this conversation about what is the value of education? You know, I think that education, this is part of what we should do, is be helping aspiring entrepreneurs really understand their skill set and how to build their skill set strategically for what they want to accomplish, you know. And kind of bringing this back to legal, it helps set them up to have this team that is complementary, and where the roles are very clarified. I think that can help on the partnership route.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
I'd agree with that. And that's sort of organically into point number 4 out of 5. It deals with bad deals. So I like to call it, here's the deal. Number 4. Most business disputes that I see as an attorney originate from a partnership agreement where these two parties have no legal background. And so they decide to form their own entity without consulting an attorney. In addition, startups often take on bad business in that a company will take on clients without knowing how much it should charge for certain services. If you price things too high, the business runs the risk of not getting customers to buy into their concept, and pricing too low runs the risk of not earning enough. Especially in the service sector, we operate on our time. And so if we undercharge on a flat fee basis for certain tasks, we may end up putting in 10 or 20 hours to a project that we thought would take us 2 to 3. And that can create a massive problem for businesses who need to divert their attention elsewhere.
Exactly. Okay. And so have you seen this dynamic play out with any of your clients? Do you have an example of this type of thing?
Oh, certainly. I had a client who deals primarily with flat fee business formations, actually, another attorney. And at the outset, they would just charge a flat fee to compete with the LegalZooms of the world. But what they weren't doing is they weren't baking in some time to respond to emails, follow up client calls, potential rejections from the IRS or the Secretary of State, all of which starts to add on to their time that they can't necessarily charge for. And this happens a lot in the entertainment industry too. Someone will want to work with an independent producer on a motion picture. And so they'll offer a whole host of production services, not knowing that the producer is looking for these 12 to 14-hour workdays. And so with the time that they're spending on set, filming a movie or a TV series, they're not spending time with other clients or running other aspects of their business. And that can certainly erode away from their profitability as a result.
I really like the way that you're tying like business operations to the legal component, because I think a lot of times when people think legal, they think I need to get my business license, I need to, get my permits and so forth. But what I really like what you're doing is you're talking about how the way that entrepreneurs set the business up affects the legality of their business, down the road. That's a really valuable insight and approach.
Certainly, it's been my experience in doing this through 6.5 years of practice thus far that oftentimes legal issues end up having business solutions. More often than not, we don't have to involve courts to resolve disputes. A comprehensive agreement has to identify those business issues. And so these areas of business and law are so intertwined with one another that I don't think it's possible to just discuss each one individually and silo them out. A good person and a good entrepreneur really does have to have a solid understanding of both sides. So the last one out of the 5 is what I like to call the non-lawyer. A lot of clients have come to me, clients who have funded their companies with millions of dollars even. They'll form this entity through LegalZoom. And the issue with that is that you're essentially building a foundation, a structure for the rest of your business that doesn't support growth. So LegalZoom doesn't help entities in the same way that a business attorney can. And so a lot of companies try and save on these upfront costs by just having these boilerplate formation documents, but those don't anticipate future business challenges. And so bringing on an attorney who's proficient in formations, taxation, and a knowledge of the industry that the business operates in is so important in the long term. LegalZoom doesn't tell you what's the best entity to set up, an LLC or a corporation. It won't make an S corporation election on your behalf if you want to be taxed a different way with the IRS. These are questions that most clients find, well, we only deal with them after the fact when we've already gotten them wrong. And so having that solid foundation at the outset and not dealing with some sort of templated program at the outset makes a huge difference.
So can the startup utilize LegalZoom to do some preliminary work? Say that they're going to form an entity. Sure. I think that one of the things that LegalZoom and nolo.com is another one. They do have some materials up there that have been written by attorneys and that I think can be helpful. And I get what you're saying though, to lean on that entirely leaves a potential gap in the unique needs of each individual entrepreneur and their business being met. But I'm wondering, is there ever a place, because startups are so cash strapped, to use the documentation there to become familiar with a particular thing that they're needing, whether it's forming an LLC or any of the other processes that they need to go through for their business, to use that documentation to get familiar with things and then take that to an attorney for them to look it over, and make changes to that. Is there a place for that? Because it can be a big chunk of money off the top, right? For a startup, which is still, discovering whether it's fully going to be a go or not.
Sure, absolutely. Sites like LegalZoom, sites like NonLawyer, they provide a broad base of knowledge to generalize questions that applies equally to anyone that's looking at it. And so if the question is generic, yeah, LegalZoom and NonLawyer will have your answer. But more and more businesses want high touch service. They want to customize certain approaches. And if they're operating under LegalZoom to begin with, when they start to expand and when they start to grow, they're essentially making these patchwork changes to the foundation of their house. And that can be the danger in this case. It may save a few dollars on the front end, but it certainly doesn't when problems arise or when a company is doing well and they want to expand out their business. LegalZoom doesn't provide that comprehensive structure that allows a business the proper scalability in the long term.
So kind of maybe a mindset shift that's important is when an entrepreneur is starting out, thinking about the investment that they make with the attorney, not just as a one-off thing, but more as a relationship that will be cultivated over time. Do attorneys typically work in that way, where they, help follow a venture, through time? Or how does that work? Does it tend to be that they grow into a certain realm where then they need to, start with another attorney? Can you speak to that navigation as an
Yes, certainly. I think a good business, the ones that I've seen that have succeeded the most over the long term, start and grow with an attorney, as opposed to taking one on only when things have gone wrong or when they need to change something. And so certainly having that high service, high touch approach with certain clients makes a big difference. When they have questions, there's already a pre-established relationship there, as opposed to spending the time to bring someone up to speed on what your business does and where you want it to go.
That makes sense. Hey, let's take some questions from the audience.
Sure.
Good? Okay, let's see what we have here. We have a question from Louise. What is the most common problem startups face regardless of their industry?
Yeah, I would say that in this case, the most common issue that I see is just not having the money. I think a lot of people have big ideas, but they need to know that money's coming in on a long-term basis in order to support it. So a lot of businesses fund themselves for the first 3 to 6 months of operations. After that, there's this implicit expectation that money's coming in, and it may not be to the extent that they expect. So being able to have contingency plans, a budget in place, I would say that's crucial to long-term success. And that's an issue that a lot of businesses face. They focus on year one and very little thereafter.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, we actually see that quite a bit, because we have very young, very nascent or beginning aspiring entrepreneurs, and then some that have just gotten their businesses off the ground. And it is such a big thing just to get it off the ground, and looking at a year in advance seems like ages, right? And yet it's important to have that longer term view as well. Like, okay, what happens after this? And having the contingency plans, like on the financials, I think having multiple scenarios of this, this plan that I have laid out, that's best case scenario. But worst case scenario where the sales don't come in as expected? Or what is the scenario when this is fabulously successful, more than what I thought, and now I'm having a hard time keeping up? I think, having those multiple scenarios is super important, right? Okay, here's another question from Valerie. Where can someone find a good attorney that works with small startups? Great question.
Yeah, absolutely. I think finding someone localized is always a great approach because they'll know the local market. So that's good as an outset. Word of mouth is usually how I find my best clients, so referrals. And likewise, I think a lot of solo attorneys look for small businesses in a certain area that they may have practiced in before they went solo. And so just finding a good fit is really important in that sense. I don't know if that fully answered the question, but finding someone local, finding someone who's a good fit, sort of feeling them out to begin with, and someone that can sort of anticipate future challenges before they even come up.
Yeah. So is it important that a attorney has experience in the particular industry of the startup?
I would say absolutely. And it gets back to my earlier point, Julie, this idea that a lot of the legal issues that clients will bring up have these business solutions. And so if you've worked in this industry before, you can anticipate what those business issues are and how to resolve them before they occur.
Here's another one, Daniel. How do I figure out what is the best business entity for my business?
So whenever I'm counseling a new client, I like to break it down into two areas: income and liability. Depending on how much money you're making in the first few years of operations, that will dictate whether it makes sense to form as a partnership that may have some extra liability versus a limited liability company versus a corporation, each of which have advantages and disadvantages of one another. So when income's coming in, you're taxed differently as a corporation than you are as an LLC. You're taxed differently as a partnership as well. So depending on how much money you make, your taxable bracket will change. That's one side of it. The other side is liability. What level of risk is someone willing to take on? Do they want a corporate structure that insulates them and indemnifies them if anything goes wrong and the company gets sued? Or are they operating primarily on relationships and trust? In which case you may want a more streamlined structure, something like a partnership or a sole proprietorship, where you don't have that liability protection, but you're less concerned about it. So income and liability, those are the two big concepts.
That's awesome. And it seems like another part of the picture that would come in here is business insurance. So having a insurance broker, somebody who can look at the business from the insurance point of view together with the legal point of view to help provide that risk reduction. So I think we can see how it's important to begin building this team, of your legal representative, of your insurance person, I think also your accountant and CPA. We talked about financial issues, right? I think those three professionals are super important to bring into the startup team before things become an issue. Is there anybody else you would add to that initial startup circle?
I think those three are absolutely spot on. I think you want a comprehensive business attorney who knows your structure and knows you personally. I think you want an accountant or a bookkeeper to manage the financial aspects of it. And you want an insurance broker who will recommend umbrella coverage above all else. That tends to be the most comprehensive for all businesses and the most safe.
Excellent. Well, if you can believe it, that is our time. And I'm sure that our audience would love to keep track with you, contact you. So what is the best way for them to do that?
Sure. So if you're looking to contact me, my website is www.danielspitzlaw.com. So that's DANIELSPITZ.com. You can take a look at my website, see the hosted services that I offer. And you're always welcome to reach out and schedule a free initial consultation through that website.
Excellent. Thank you, Daniel. And to our audience, there were some questions that we didn't get to. Go ahead and put your questions in the comments of the video, and we can circle back afterward and get to those questions. All right. And so, Daniel, thank you so much for taking the time here today to share with our aspiring entrepreneur audience, steps that they can take to help avoid some of the legal pitfalls that are so common and that can be detrimental to their businesses. We appreciate that.
It's my pleasure. Thanks so much for having me, Julie. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, you're welcome. And to our audience, we hope that this discussion supports your entrepreneurial journey. And we invite you to join our community. Please like, share, and subscribe. We're here every week helping to support you on our mission to create livelihoods that matter and to help you be your own boss, making the world a better place. So have a great week, everyone. Be sure to put your questions in the comments so that we can get to them. Thank you, Daniel, and we'll see you next week.